all politicians are politicians. It's about votes. That's what they're about. You got to win. So who is your constituency? Who backs you? And so when the African Americans backed in 1960 John F. Kennedy, it's a big constituency for him now, and you have to feed your constituents. And in that moment of time, Martin Luther King was an international figure on his way to winning a Nobel Peace Prize. You couldn't ignore Dr. King. You could not ignore the March on Washington. So he had to decide how to play it. And when push came to shove, Kennedy's Justice Department decided, as Eisenhower's did, that we have to be with the forces of integration, because Brown versus Topeka had proven that to be the law of the land. The Montgomery bus boycott of '55 went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it said, yes, the Rosa Parks King movement was correct. So law was on Kennedy's side that you have to start integrating public facilities. He did not like civil disobedience run amok, but the fact that the King movement, a Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was nonviolent, it was very hard to charge the African Americans with being a disruptive force when they were peacefully protesting. And so you get a morphing of the movement in Kennedy. He becomes a president that most African Americans liked and cheered because they felt he got what they were doing more than even Eisenhower.
What convinced them was the fact that in 1962 you had a terrible crisis in Mississippi over integrating the University of Mississippi. 2 people were killed in riots in Oxford, Mississippi. Kennedy had to send in Army troops to quell the upheaval. Then in 1963, there is terrible tension with the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, and the Birmingham, where there are riots and police repression of civil rights marchers. And Kennedy finally says to Brother Bobby, who's the Attorney General, he says, the Southerners say they'll take care of this. They never will. We are the ones who have to act. And so in June of '63, he gives what was really a great state paper, a brilliant speech on why now we had to act on civil rights. And what he and others in his administration understood was that this lapped over into the Cold War. You see, the Soviets and the Chinese were beating up on the United States as a racist society. The appeal to people in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, they were very worried that they would lose this contest for hearts and minds in the Cold War. And they needed to get rid of segregation across the South. So he puts that bill before the Congress. Then, in the summer of '63, Martin Luther King, A. Philip Randolph, they organize a massive march on Washington. The Kennedys are resistant to having this happen because they're fearful it will produce violence, and they tell the civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King, this is likely to undercut prospects for that civil rights bill, you see. However, the march takes place. It's nonviolent. King gives that brilliant "I Have a Dream" speech, and Kennedy invites the civil rights leaders to the White House to congratulate them on what they achieved. See, he never got any of those 4 bills passed during his presidency. But one can speculate that if he had lived, he probably would have run against Barry Goldwater in 1964. He probably would have won as big an election as Lyndon Johnson did in '64 against Goldwater, with big liberal majorities in both the Senate and the House, and then he would have gotten those 4 pieces of legislation passed. Of course, Johnson put them through, and Johnson gets deserved credit for having done it, but those bills should really be called Kennedy-Johnson bills.